The Israelis suffered heavy casualties all day. By the end of the day, Israel was facing catastrophe. Israelis had believed that once their army was in place, they would be victorious. Now they had to face the shocking truth that this hadn't happened. Prime Minister Meir sent an urgent request to the Americans, begging them to resupply the country. The Americans had responded to Prime Minister Meir's request for resupplies. For days, American planes arrived in Israel with huge numbers of tanks, shells, and new planes. Israel was in a much stronger position.
Israel had been able to divert troops to the Syrian front because the Egyptian army had halted. Syria's President Assad demanded to know why the Egyptians were not advancing through the Sinai as agreed.
The president kept phoning Sadat and insisting, "This is not what we agreed." Sadat never gave him a straight answer.
Syria appealed over Sadat's head to the Soviet Union, still Egypt's patron. The Soviet Prime Minister came to Cairo to sort things out.
Prime Minister Kosygin kept asking Sadat why his forces had stopped without taking the Sinai. He was infuriated by Sadat's answers.
President Sadat yielded to Soviet pressure and gave the order to advance, much to the dismay of his chief of staff.
It was doomed to failure from the start. Israel's air force was much stronger than ours.
Now the war began to swing Israel's way. In 3 hours, 250 Egyptian tanks were destroyed. But Egypt still had 2 armies in the Sinai. The Israelis planned a daring coup. They set out to cut through the gap in the Egyptian lines, create a bridgehead over the canal, and sweep around to isolate the Egyptian Third Army. The architect of the plan was General Ariel Sharon.
We slipped through the Egyptian lines without major problems. But when we reached the canal, there was a ferocious battle.
It was a terrible night. I think that night we lost, from my division, about 300 killed and around 1,000 wounded. And all of us, from soldiers to the divisional commander, we all were fighting there. It was maybe the most terrible night I've ever seen.
Eventually, at 1 in the morning, the paratroopers crossed to the other side in dinghies.
The next day, Israeli forces raced across the canal to secure their bridgehead.
I was at the canal. I could see the tanks crossing and the trees on the other side.
The Israelis crossed the canal, and about 24 hours later, we got a message from Brezhnev inviting me to come to Moscow.
We thought Kissinger's visit to Moscow would be useful. He could help us stop the conflict.
We thought it would give the Israelis more time if I went to Moscow, because nothing could happen until I got there. While I was in the air, Nixon sent a message directly to Brezhnev saying that I was fully authorized to conclude, but I frankly wanted to stall.
The Soviets were in such a hurry to end the fighting that General Secretary Brezhnev led the talks with Kissinger himself.
He insisted that the advance be stopped. In return, Kissinger wanted the Arabs to recognize Israel's right to exist.
What we said was that there should be direct negotiations at some point between the Arabs and Israel. I told Brezhnev I would carefully communicate everything he said to Washington, but that there had to be some time interval so that I could get the president's views. And he said, no, here's a message. And he gave me power of attorney, that, in effect, power of attorney that the president had given me, which did not thrill me.
The Secretary of State realized he could stall no longer. While still in Moscow, he agreed to terms for a ceasefire.
It was announced on the 22nd of October. The Israelis agreed to the ceasefire as well, but in reality ignored it and pushed on south to secure more land west of the canal.